We've got some more guests coming in here in just a moment to continue talking about the Battle of Los Angeles and the moment we're in. We've got Peter SIMI, who is an expert on authoritarianism, and our friend Bobby Jones, who's the host of the Anchor Watch here on Lincoln Square, a guy who knows this shit backward and forward, if I may just say it bluntly. I want to start with you, Bobby, because you and I talked a brief minute before the show started tonight about how outrageously effed up this is to have active duty forces being deployed for a domestic law enforcement purpose in this country when there is not an insurrection, there is not a threat, there's not a rebellion. Talk to us about where that's at and tell folks why you know this shit.
Well, okay, so real quick, I am, I'm a retired Navy commander, 22 years, Annapolis graduate, and I got commissioned by George W. Bush, and 109 days later, 9/11 happened. So I was gone for 20 something years, and you go around the world. But most importantly, one of my tours of duty, I was actually a United Nations peacekeeper. Now there are 60,000 of them around the world from all over the world, but only 30 Americans are allowed to do it at one time. Here is my blue beret. Okay. You can't find this anywhere. Peacekeeping is hard, right? And I say all that because right now we're looking at three major lines of operation that the Trump administration has totally destroyed. Number one, the legality. Number two, the morality behind this mission. And finally, the operational side, all jacked up. Remember, when he came into office, the first thing that he did, even before we knew Hegseth was going to be the guy, they fired the three head judge advocate generals of the military branches, Army, Navy, Air Force. Right. They fired the top lawyers in each branch. Why? Because they knew eventually they get to this moment where the legality of their actions will be challenged. That's number one. Number two, from the morality standpoint, you guys have already hit on this earlier, but to have active duty, the 700 Marines that have been pulled into this active duty military being involved with operations against other Americans on domestic soil. These are words I never thought I'd say in my entire career, my entire life, right? And this goes into the last piece. Operationally, words have meaning, right? So Task Force 51 under NORTHCOM, United States Northern Command, they released their statement to try to make this seem smooth and legal. However, the 700 Marines that they've pulled into this group were not part of Task Force 51 prior to. They pulled them in immediately. And if you know anything about deploying for a mission, you have to go through what's called a training cycle and certification that you can execute those missions. You know this, Rick. You've been in the Department of Defense. So here's the thing. They don't have a training cycle. And so therefore, there's no certification. And then they went out of their way to say that Task Force 51, the U.S. Army component, will be responsible for the most important thing, and that's rules of engagement. First, we're talking about rules of engagement against American citizens. I want that to sit in. Number two, the training that they have to go through is different. Going back to my original standpoint, I've heard people say, well, Marines know how to secure buildings. There's a difference between securing a building and maintaining peace, which is why I had to go through all this other special training to wear that bonnet and beret, right? You cannot say that they're the same thing because peacekeeping takes de-escalation into account, civil authorities into account, working with local law enforcement into account. And so going into this police state that was mentioned earlier, supported by active duty military, we're now telling a 20-year-old rifleman in a platoon that you have to determine if this person's a threat, and they know who you are. Heck, it could be someone from your neighborhood. And now you have to execute a force continuum where that person may die. I want people to understand what we're doing here.
It is that to my mind, and thank you for that. That's a very cogent explanation of this for people. These Marines guys, they're not trained in civil affairs.
No,
these are not people who have had any meaningful experience in handling the sort of circumstance they're in right now. And again, these are kids. And they're 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. It's the 21-year-olds are the oldsters in this group. They do not have experience in life or in the training cycle, as Bobby mentioned, to expose them to what they would be required to do in this case. But in some ways, I think that is yes, their proximity mattered in some ways, but I think it's
Yes.
also the symbolic nature of the Marines. They are door kickers. They
Yes.
are shooters. They are,
Yes.
they're not civil affairs troops. And I keep saying that phrase,
No.
folks, for those of you at home. Civil affairs people would be the people you would deploy. A lot of National Guard units are civil affairs units, and they're good
Yes.
at that. They're good at handling disaster, crisis, stuff in the streets. That's why the National Guard, when it's appropriate, unlike this circumstance, gets
Right.
turned out, not door kickers. So I want to ask you, Pete, I just get down to this because you and I have talked before about the inclination to militarize power to preserve political authority in these sort of situations. Tell me what your take on this moment is, because I think it is a preview of an authoritarian playbook that we're still watching the pages unfold.
Yeah, most definitely. I think we see this as the most recent chapter of an emerging agenda that Trump brought into office. And we saw it early on when he first took office with the pardons of the J6 folks that attacked the U.S. Capitol and assaulted police officers. And that sets the stage for essentially legitimizing essentially political violence in a very formal way. And of course, it sends a broad message to folks that were supportive of the attack on the U.S. Capitol, as well as those who actually committed the attack. And so now what we're seeing in California is a further kind of testing of the boundaries and how far can Trump take things. And so I think, he's very good at sending trial balloons out. And so he's using the term insurrection, but then, of course, he kind of walks it back a little bit. He wants to see how far that can, how he can take that and how that'll play. And then, of course, more broadly with using the Marines and, kind of characterizing things the way he has done in terms of, LA being on the brink of collapse. And if it hadn't been for what they've done so far in terms of the National Guard, the city would have burned the way it burned, just a few months ago with the forest fires. So this is all kind of part of this agenda that's been unfolding and with, he wants absolute power. So the question is how do you get to that? I think my sense is that he has several different pathways potentially in mind. And, he's working with, his advisors to kind of playbook those and think about what gets him to that end stage, which is the absolute power.
Stuart, jump in.
Well, look, I would love to get the thoughts of both of you because you know a lot more about this than I do. How do you think this is being inside the military? I mean, what are they? You didn't sign up. If you're a Marine, you didn't sign up to go fight the Battle of Brentwood. I mean, what's it's like, really? We're gonna give me a break. But I'm sure there's obviously a lot of different answers to this. It's affecting people differently. But what are y'all's thoughts on that, Pete? Do you have?
Well, I mean, the military is a diverse body of individuals, right? And so you get the full broad spectrum of people's political beliefs and perspectives and background and so forth. So there is a segment who, are certainly supportive of Trump and who go beyond just being supportive of Trump, even align with kind of far-right extremist beliefs and even in some cases actual affiliations with groups and so forth. So for those folks, obviously, this is, in a way you might say, music to the ears. In other words, this is actually consistent with a kind of very dark vision that they have of their military service and ways that they can enact that military service in some very, violent and dangerous ways. And of course, we've seen this play out in the worst kind of ways in terms of actual violent attacks by either current or former military.
It's a really good point. On January 6th, there are a lot of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course, the Oklahoma City bombing committed by Tim McVeigh and others with military experience. So that, and of course, I'm not suggesting that characterizes a majority of people currently in the military or with military experience, but certainly there is that segment.
Bobby,
I would like to. I understand what the good doctor is saying. I would take it from a different approach, and that is, at the end of the day, the military does what civilian authority tells them to do. Now, how they feel about it, that can be a completely separate issue. If you serve a career in the military, there are going to be times you get orders from civilian authority that you may not agree with, this, that, and the other, and you execute. Now, understand this for people watching. In the military, the enlisted take a different oath than the officers. And I hammer this point because it is the military officers, which is why Trump has targeted the service academies, my alma mater in Annapolis, West Point, because they are the final line of defense. When you enlist in the military and you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, to obey the orders of the president and the officers appointed above me. But when you become commissioned as an officer, your oath is different. It does not have that line about obey the orders of the president. We are the last line of defense against a tyrannical commander in chief. So I say that to let you know the legality of this is where it comes into play, which is why the first thing they did, they fired the head of the military, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the only female in the Joint Chiefs, and they fired the lawyers. Those were the first firings they did. They tried to decapitate the ethical example and then slide in legal exception, right? So it may come down to that Marine Corps captain or first lieutenant that may have to say, I know for a fact that that person is unarmed. We are not to fire a weapon against them, right? Which is why officers go through that additional training. Do I think the majority of the military would want to go down the streets of LA? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Heck, what they'd like to do is go on Liberty down the streets of LA and have a good ass time. That's what they'd rather do. But here they are. And if you look at how this is played out, you know, they show pictures of the National Guard sleeping on the ground. This was haphazard. There was no planning. This is a reaction. And my final point I'll say is this, ladies and gentlemen, look at the timing of when all this popped off. This is right after Elon Musk accused Donald Trump of being all in the Epstein files. And right after that, boom, everything took off and escalated. This time last week, we were talking about them two having a little teenage breakup. Now we're talking about this. I don't think it's a coincidence. And unfortunately,
I don't think it is a
Marines and everybody else have been pulled in. Right.
I do believe that Trump is a master of curating the reality around him and of changing the subject. And, you know, his traditional way of changing the subject is, oh my God, I'm in a scandal, so I'll create another scandal to move on. I do think this fits in with and I don't know, I sometimes think we give Trump a little too much credit on the authoritarian ambition thing. He is an authoritarian. He is ambitious to do it. But I think the people beneath him, the Stephen Millers, the Pam Bondys, the Tom Homans, the Steve Bannons, the Kristi Noems, I think they have a much more cohesive idea about what they want to do here. So, Peter, I want to ask you that when we see these kind of authoritarian moves and expansions, it really always does come down to a group of people who implement and execute on this, who are the ideologues and the thinkers. Their influence here seems to be shaping a lot of this. I mean, I see Stephen Miller saying more of the words than Donald Trump is saying about it's a rebellion, it's an insurrection, it's all that.
No, I think that's absolutely right. You've got to have the implementers. You've got to have the folks that really are deeply committed to figuring out the strategy and the best ways to put things into place and the chess pieces on the board and are, you know, in some cases literally quite, I mean, Steve Miller's, the way people I've talked to have worked with him literally say that all he sleeps, eats, and breathes immigration and how to figure out how to do mass deportation. Like that, he's literally obsessed with that. And so you need those kinds of individuals that live, eat, sleep, and breathe this kind of stuff to figure things out. And I don't think that, you know, that's not Trump's inclination. He's never really demonstrated that as kind of how he thinks and operates.
Yeah.
The handlers around him. I was about to say, Rick, the handlers around him, and I use the word handlers, as he deteriorates mentally, and we're seeing it. If you're going to go after Joe Biden, go after Donald John Trump too. As he deteriorates, he speaks less, and the subordinates, the handlers, are speaking up more. The handlers are the policy wonks. You know, you hear Steve Bannon say stuff, it's calculated. Steve Bannon went to the Naval War College and got the same degree I got, master's degree. I know what he's doing. Okay, he's not a genius. He's implementing information warfare across a spectrum, and he's
Correct.
saturating everybody, right? And so the thing is, when he speaks up, when Miller speaks up, when Bondi speaks up, notice who you don't hear from. They started shutting up Pete Hegseth because they realized he can't speak concurrently. And you have not seen Little Marco anywhere, and he's the Secretary of State. That's by design.
Yeah,
it's by design. And so when you look at this I'm looking at this as a psychological warfare mission on steroids is what we're suffering in America.
Yeah.
Right. And that goes to what the good doctor is saying about how authoritarianism takes root. This is the final phase. They realize that Trump has a certain shelf life. They're cramming everything they can in, and they are relying on two major things. They're relying on Congress, Article 1 of the Constitution to not do its job, check and balance. And they are relying on the fact that the American public does not care enough before they realize what's happening. If you look at this just from a holistic standpoint, you have the three branches of government, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. And the only one doing anything is the judicial branch, Article 3. Right? And no one, if you would have told me that in 2017, I wouldn't have believed it. Right? So if you look at this from an operational standpoint, they have objectives. Project 2025 laid them out. If you notice the accelerated pace, they know they have realistically until the midterms before the bill comes due, because they are anticipating a loss, at least in the House. That's what they're anticipating, which is why they're rushing strategically to get this stuff done. And they're going to be checked only when someone steps up to do it. My great concern, and this is my final point on this, my great concern is the damage that's being done in the short term will become doctrine for everyone else after Trump.
Exactly.
That's the concern.
Let me ask one.
Go ahead.
There's a Canadian journalist, Stephen Marsh is his name, who has written a serious book a few years ago, with the thesis that America is in a civil war, that it's just a slow-moving civil war. As he points out, what's the difference between Fort Sumter and January 6th? No one died at Fort Sumter. This is sort of playing out. Is that a crazy idea?
Not at all, in my view.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, I've thought in similar terms. The difficult thing is so many people don't see it.
That part,
and aren't able to, I guess, get their hands around it or their mind around it for lots of different reasons, and partly because there's so much disinformation and misinformation that's circulating on a regular basis. And there's also lots of distractions. Weapons of mass distraction are pretty powerful, and there's plenty of those that keep us looking elsewhere. But it does seem like we are in some kind of a civil war of sorts, at least, that we just aren't fully aware of. And there are folks that are, though, and that are fighting this battle in very strategic and varied ways, some of which are nonviolent, and they're using institutional strategies, changing laws and various things of that nature. But then there are also the violent prong of this undeclared civil war, and they're using the classic strategy of terrorism and intimidation at various levels, local, state, and federal, obviously, in terms of the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Well, Peter and Bobby, I want to thank you both for joining us tonight. This is a fantastic conversation. We will have you back shortly. Stuart, thank you. I'm going to let Bobby and Peter go, and we're going to bring Joe Trippi back in and wrap up for the evening. And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on Lincoln Square. Our audience has been growing just by leaps and bounds, folks, and it's all about you guys. And we are so deeply grateful for your support, for your encouragement, for joining Lincoln Square. We know that there is a shift happening in the media right now, and the traditional news media is not doing the job for this country. And we're proud to be here doing our little part, articulating where we are in this democracy, articulating where the fight is and can and should be. So tonight I want to wrap up. Joe, let's start with you. I think we had some really good insights tonight from some brilliant people. Tell people where they should be headed mentally and organizationally here as we come into the missile parade weekend, as LA keeps playing out, and as we come up towards No Kings.
I really think the No Kings protests are really important. If you're going, go and take someone with you. We need to grow this. The last segment was talking about how the threat and how enough Americans aren't either don't care or aren't awake enough because of the disinformation and everything else. We have to create a bunch of attention. And on one day, June 14th, all of us can do something to get attention on what we want this to be about, not on what Trump and Stephen Miller are trying to create. Terrific. Stuart?
Well, look, I just want to thank both you guys because you're out there doing your Substack thing, writing tremendous stuff. And everybody here should subscribe. And if you can, you have in your means, do a paid subscription. It's not very much. Subscribe to Lincoln Square. Subscribe to Rick's Substack, Joe's Substack. There are 2 podcasts, 3 podcasts. Rick has the Enemies List and the Lincoln Project podcast. Joe has that Trippi show. Though most of us really think of it as Alex's show, but that's a different discussion. Because no one's out there going to save ourselves. And we're doing this for the same reasons you're doing it, but we need your support. So thank you. And it's wherever we are, it's just beginning.
Yes. Yeah. All right, folks, listen, it is 6:00 on the dot. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. We think this is an important conversation, and we will be back again next Tuesday with the strategy session. Not every show is going to be a blockbuster like tonight, but man, it was a really well done show. I want to thank Sam in the background for making this thing pop and making everything work smoothly. And thank you to my friends. I appreciate you both. Love you guys. We'll see you folks next week.
See you, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.